The morning sun cast a soft golden haze over the wide-open plains of Willow Creek, Texas, a town where folks knew each other by name, where gossip traveled faster than tumbleweeds in the wind, and where change was greeted with equal parts curiosity and suspicion. Clara Evans felt every eye on her as she pulled into the small gravel parking lot of Willow Creek Elementary in her modest, beat-up sedan. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. She took a deep breath and stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Hair neatly tied back, pale blue cardigan buttoned up to her throat, and a quiet resolve in her eyes. She was ready at least. She told herself she was. Clara had taken the job as the new special education teacher after years of working in a busy city school in Dallas. Burnout and heartbreak had pushed her out of the city. She longed for something quieter, something slower. Willow Creek seemed like the kind of place where she could disappear into her work and finally breathe again. She walked into the school building with her tote bag slung over one shoulder, nodding politely to the front office secretary, who offered a warm but clearly curious smile. A few children peeked at her from behind lockers. Some teachers whispered politely as she passed. She wasn't used to small towns or their unfiltered interest in newcomers, but she pressed on. In her classroom, Clara was unpacking supplies when the door opened quietly. A small girl with curly brown hair and wide hazel eyes stood in the doorway, clutching a sketchpad to her chest. Behind her, the principal, Mr. Henryson, gave Clara a nod. "This is Layla Harper," he said gently. "She's in your group. Just moved here. She's deaf, but she reads lips pretty well and uses a SL. We were told you're fluent." Clara's face softened instantly. She crouched down to the girl's eye level, offering a gentle smile before lifting her hands and signing slowly. "Hello, Lila, I'm Ms. Evans. I'm happy to meet you." The transformation was immediate. Lila's tense posture relaxed and a smile tugged at her lips. She signed back, "Hi." Mr. Henryson raised an eyebrow behind them, clearly impressed. Clara stood and nodded once. "We'll be just fine." After he left, Clara knelt beside Lila again, showing her around the classroom. There were labeled bins, cozy reading corners, and visual charts. Clara used both signs and gestures, letting Lila warm up at her own pace. Within minutes, the little girl was sketching contentedly at her desk, occasionally looking up to sign a question. It was then, through the window, that Clara noticed a tall man leaning against the fence near the playground. He stood with his arms crossed, his Stetson casting a shadow over his face, but his posture was unmistakably protective. Watching, waiting. She didn't know who he was. She returned her focus to Lila, thinking perhaps he was just a curious parent waiting to be introduced. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that the man watching her through that glass was Jack Harper, one of the wealthiest landowners in the county. He didn't usually come to schools or linger outside classrooms, but his daughter was all he had left of his late wife, and he wasn't about to trust her to just anyone. Jack had expected a stiff, clinical type of teacher. What he found instead was a woman who met his daughter in silence and spoke to her in her language without hesitation, without pity, and without performing for anyone's approval. He watched Clara gently rest her hand on Lila's shoulder as the girl beamed up at her, laughing silently and signing quickly. Jack didn't understand the signs, but he understood what was happening. His daughter, who had barely smiled since the funeral, was laughing, and the shy woman with the cardigan and quiet voice had somehow done in 5 minutes what months of therapy could. Single quotes T. Jack turned to leave, his boots crunching against the gravel as he walked back to his truck. He wasn't sure what he felt exactly, but he knew he'd be back tomorrow. Meanwhile, Clara returned to unpacking books, oblivious to the storm she had stirred in a guarded man's heart just by saying hello in the only language that mattered. Jack Harper had never liked schools. Too many walls. Too many rules. Too many people telling him how to raise his daughter. After his wife, Elena, passed 2 years ago, he'd withdrawn from almost everything that didn't involve cattle, soil, or his little girl. His world had shrunk to the size of his ranch, and he liked it that way. Or at least he had, until yesterday. Jack couldn't get the image of the new teacher out of his mind. The quiet woman with the tired eyes and soft hands, who had knelt down and signed to Lila like it was the most natural thing in the world. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't made a show of it either. She had simply seen his daughter, not her disability, not her silence, and connected. He hadn't expected that. Hell, he hadn't expected much of anything. After moving Lila to Willow Creek for a quieter life, he assumed he'd have to fight tooth and nail for someone to even try to understand her. But instead, this shy teacher had greeted his daughter with fluency and tenderness. That night, after putting Lila to bed, Jack sat alone on the porch, the stars wheeling overhead, turning slowly in a black sky. A cigar burned low between his fingers. He wasn't a man given to overthinking, but Clara Evans had rattled something loose in him. Not just because she was kind, not even because she was beautiful, though she was in a plain, unfussy kind of way that lingered. It was something deeper. Something dangerous. The next morning, Clara was sorting flashcards at her desk when she felt the shift in the air. That sixth sense that comes from being watched. She looked up to see Jack Harper standing just outside her classroom window again, arms crossed, boots dusty from the road. Their eyes met for a second before he looked away, adjusting the brim of his hat. Clara blinked, confused. He hadn't come in, hadn't introduced himself, just stood there like some kind of cowboy guardian angel. Moments later, the secretary buzzed in, announcing Mr. Harper was here to check on Lila. Clara stepped into the hallway and met him halfway. He was taller than she expected and broad-shouldered in that way only men who work land tend to be. His eyes were a stormy shade of gray-blue, unreadable, and his voice was low and slightly gravelly when he finally spoke. "Just wanted to see how she's settling in," he said. Nodding toward the door. Clara offered a small smile, her fingers nervously knotting together. "She's doing very well. Smart, curious. Picks up on things quickly." Jack nodded. "Yeah, she always has." They stood in silence for a moment. Clara could feel her pulse in her throat. Jack wasn't rude, but he wasn't warm either. There was a guardedness about him, like a man who'd built walls so thick he forgot how to take them down. "You use sign language," he finally said. "I did," she replied. "I've been fluent since college. My younger cousin is deaf." "That so?" His gaze softened just a little. "Lila doesn't meet many people who bother learning." Clara shrugged lightly. "It's not a bother. It's her language." That answer seemed to strike something in him. He looked at her a long moment, then gave a short nod. "Appreciate what you're doing for her." Before she could say anything else, he tipped his hat and turned to leave. Clara watched him walk down the hall, boots echoing against linoleum. She stood still for a long while, wondering why her heart was beating faster than it should have. Over the next few days, Jack began showing up more often. Always brief. Always reserved. Just long enough to check in, nod at Clara, and quietly leave. The staff noticed, of course. Whispers began circulating in the teacher's lounge. "That's Jack Harper," one aide whispered. "Owns half the county. Never seen him so much as look at a school before." Clara tried not to pay attention. She didn't want to believe the rumors. She wasn't here to get involved, and she certainly wasn't the kind of woman men like Jack noticed. And yet, every time he came by, she found herself smoothing her hair, checking her reflection in the classroom window. Not for his sake, she told herself. Just habit. But Lila noticed. One day, as Clara helped her pack up, The little girl signed with a mischievous glint in her eye. "My daddy likes you." Clara laughed nervously, signing back, "Don't be silly." But deep down, a quiet part of her wondered if the girl was right. And outside, leaning against the fence again, Jack Harper was wondering the same thing. Clara Evans wasn't used to attention. She preferred quiet corners and simple routines, which made her a natural with children who didn't always thrive in the noisy, fast-paced world around them. But nothing about Jack Harper's presence felt simple or quiet. Since that first conversation in the hallway, Jack had been dropping by the school with curious frequency, always under the guise of checking on Lila, always polite, always brief. But it wasn't long before the staff started noticing the pattern. "He's here again," murmured Mrs. Langley, the school librarian, peeking through the front office blinds. "That's the third time this week." Clara overheard it but said nothing. She'd grown used to the soft hum of town gossip and the weight of unwanted attention. Still, every time she heard his boots echoing down the hall, she felt her chest tighten, not in fear, but in anticipation. It wasn't that Jack was trying to be charming. If anything, he was too stoic for that. But he had a way of watching her, not just looking, but seeing. And that unnerved her more than anything else. She wasn't used to being seen. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Clara was staying late to clean up after a small reading group when she heard a knock on the classroom door. She turned, startled, to find Jack standing there, hat in hand, hair damp from the misty drizzle. "Didn't think you'd still be here," he said. Stepping inside, Clara straightened the pile of papers and offered a tentative smile. "I usually stay late Thursdays, prepping materials for next week." Jack glanced around the room. Simple, organized, full of small touches, hand-labeled bins, calming colors, a string of paper stars above Lila's desk. "You're good at this," he said. After a long pause, Clara blinked. "At teaching?" He nodded. "At seeing her. At knowing what she needs." Clara's voice softened. "She's easy to love." Jack's eyes met hers then, and for the first time, the air between them changed. It felt heavier, quieter, something unspoken passing between them. Clara looked away, flustered. "I'm just doing my job." "You're doing more than that," he replied, his voice low. "Leela's been happier these past few weeks than I've seen her in a long time. And that's got everything to do with you." She didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments were not a currency she dealt in often. And when they came from a man like Jack, grounded, weather-worn, unflinchingly honest, they carried more weight than she was ready for. Before she could find her voice, Lila ran into the room, soaked from the short dash from after-school care. "Daddy!" She signed excitedly, throwing her arms around him. He bent down, scooped her up with ease, and smiled in that quiet way of his warm but reserved. Clara watched the exchange, heart swelling at the sight of them. They were so connected, despite everything they'd lost. There was a tenderness in Jack's silence with his daughter that mirrored Clara's own. As Lila gathered her things, Jack turned to Clara one last time. "You ever been out to the ranch?" She shook her head, surprised by the question. "No, I haven't." "You should come by sometime. Lila'd like that." "I think you might too." And just like that, he was gone again, his daughter in his arms, boots echoing down the hallway. That night, Clara sat in her tiny kitchen, staring at a cup of tea gone cold. Her mind spun with questions. Why did he keep showing up? Why did he look at her like she mattered? And why, despite every instinct telling her to keep her distance, did a part of her want to go to that ranch? She wasn't naive. She knew men like Jack, rooted, closed off, guarded. And she knew herself shy, scarred by past mistakes, unwilling to invite chaos into her carefully rebuilt life. And yet, something about Jack didn't feel like chaos. It felt calm, solid, and something about the way Lila looked at her like she already belonged in there. Little World was harder to ignore each day. By the end of the week, Jack had stopped by twice more. Each time, the conversations were a little longer. Each time, he lingered a little more, and Clara, despite herself, had begun to look forward to the sound of his boots. Little did she know, Jack wasn't just coming for his daughter anymore. He was coming for the quiet woman with the shy smile, slowly falling for her in ways he didn't fully understand yet, and Clara might just be falling too. The rumors started as whispers, harmless, curious, small-town observations. Jack Harper sure has been stopping by the school a lot lately. Maybe he's finally moving on. That new teacher's sweet. Quiet, though. Y'all don't think something's going on there, do you? Clara heard it first in the break room, murmured over styrofoam coffee cups and stale donuts. The way people talked when they thought you were too polite to respond or too shy to push back. At first, she brushed it off. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just doing her job, and Jack was just being a devoted father. Nothing more. But by the following week, the tone of the whispers changed. The glances lingered longer. Conversations hushed as she entered a room. And though no one said it to her face, Clara could feel it. The suspicion, the judgment, the watchful eyes. She hated it, not because of the gossip itself. She'd learned long ago that people would always talk, but because it made her question herself, her motives, her growing feelings. She hadn't asked for Jack Harper's attention. She hadn't dressed differently, hadn't flirted, hadn't even imagined someone like him might see her that way. And yet, he had. And worse, she had started to feel something, too. That was the most dangerous part. One Friday afternoon, after the final bell had rung and the hallways had emptied, Clara sat at her desk staring blankly at her lesson planner. She didn't hear the knock at first. It wasn't until the door creaked open that she looked up. Jack stood there, holding a takeout coffee and a brown paper bag. He smiled faintly. "Peace offering," he said. "Thought you could use a break." Clara hesitated, lips parting slightly before she managed a quiet, "You shouldn't be here." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She stood, arms folded protectively across her chest. "People are talking, Jack. They think there's something going on between us." His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed even. "And is that a problem?" Clara looked away, the words catching in her throat. "It is for me. I came here to work, to focus, not to be the subject of town gossip." He walked in, setting the coffee and bag gently on her desk. "Clara, I don't care what this town says. Let them talk." "Well, I do care," she snapped more sharply than intended. "I care because I've worked too hard to rebuild my life, to be seen as a serious teacher, not someone trying to catch a rich man's attention." The words hung heavy in the air. Jack stepped back, surprised not by her outburst, but by the pain in her voice. "I didn't realize that's how you saw me," he said quietly. Clara shook her head, eyes burning. "That's not how I see you. But it's how they do. And I'm the outsider. I don't get the benefit of the doubt." Jack exhaled slowly. "So what am I supposed to stop coming? Stop thanking the woman who's made my daughter light up for the first time in years? Pretend I'm not interested?" Clara's eyes widened slightly. It was the first time he'd said it so plainly. "I'm not asking you to pretend," she said softly. "I'm asking you to understand that I can't afford mistakes. Not again." Jack's brows furrowed. "Someone hurt you?" She looked down. "More than one someone." Silence stretched between them. Jack finally nodded, picking up the paper bag. "Well, lunch offer still stands, even if it's just as friends." Clara's lips twitched in the faintest smile. "Friends?" He shrugged, smiling gently. "For now." and then he was gone. That weekend, Clara went for a walk through the town square, trying to clear her mind. The autumn leaves were beginning to turn, swirling in reds and golds across the sidewalks. She passed the diner, where she saw Mrs. Langley and a few others whispering behind their menus as she walked by. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. Clara paused by the bookshop window, her reflection looking back at her tired, unsure, out of place. But then she thought of Lila's hands flying excitedly through the air, her joy growing each day. She thought of Jack's quiet voice, offering friendship with no strings attached. And she thought of the peace she'd found here before the noise started. Maybe it wasn't about hiding from whispers. Maybe it was about finding the courage to keep showing up anyway. The storm came in fast. One moment, the skies over Willow Creek were a gentle gray. The next, a wall of dark clouds rolled in from the west like a warning dot. It was late Friday afternoon, and Clara Evans was still in her classroom with Lila Harper and a few other students. The school hosted a weekly enrichment hour after dismissal, just crafts, books, and calm time for kids who needed a slower transition into the weekend. Clara had offered to stay late. She often did. By the time thunder rumbled loud enough to rattle the windows, most of the other children had been picked up. Lila, still coloring at her desk, glanced up as a flash of lightning lit the room. Clara walked over and crouched beside her, signing, "Don't worry. We're safe. Your daddy will be here soon." Lila nodded, eyes wide but trusting. Outside, the wind began to howl. Rain came in sheets. Power flickered once, then again, before the emergency lights kicked on. The hallway outside the classroom dimmed. The office buzzed over the intercom, asking remaining staff to gather any children into central rooms until parents arrived. Clara moved quickly, guiding Lila by the hand and grabbing a flashlight. As they reached the front of the school, she could barely see 10 feet outside the doors. Trees bent sideways. The kind of storm that made you sit still and pray. She sent Jack a message, letting him know she had Lila and they were safe inside. The message showed as read, but no reply. At that moment, miles down a washed-out road, Jack Harper was stuck behind a fallen tree, cursing beneath his breath as he tried to radio his foreman. He'd left late from the south pasture, unaware of how fast the storm had turned. He tried Clara's number again, but the signal dropped before the call connected. Back at the school, Clara sat in the hallway with Lila tucked beside her, the child resting her head on Clara's shoulder. The emergency lights cast a soft glow on the linoleum floors. Thunder shook the building again. Lila flinched. Clara gently signed, "I'm right here. We'll be okay." The little girl nodded, but her fingers curled tightly around Clara's arm. They sat that way for almost an hour long after the other children had been picked up until the storm finally began to ease. The front door burst open. Jack came in soaked to the bone, eyes wild with worry, boots splashing through puddles that had blown inside. He spotted them instantly, Clara rising to her feet, Lila racing to him. He dropped to one knee, wrapping his arms around his daughter, pressing his face into her wet hair as she clung to him. Clara stood a few feet back, unsure of whether to step in or give them space. Jack looked up at her, eyes filled with relief and something else, something deeper. "You stayed," he said, voice hoarse. "Of course I did," Clara replied softly. "I couldn't leave her." Jack stood slowly, holding Lila's hand. He looked at Clara like she was something he'd been looking for and didn't know he needed, something he wasn't sure he deserved. "Come back with us," he said, "just to dry off. The roads are too rough to drive now anyway." Clara hesitated, but Lila tugged her sleeve, signing eagerly, "Come to the ranch." "Please?" Clara looked between them. She was soaked, exhausted, and emotionally frayed, but something in her heart whispered, "Go." The ranch house was warm and lived in. The kind of place that smelled like cedar and cinnamon and rain-soaked wood. Clara stood awkwardly in the doorway, wrapped in a flannel blanket Jack handed her. While Lila darted off to change clothes, Jack poured her tea in a chipped ceramic mug. She talks about you more than anyone else these days. Clara sipped the tea slowly, unsure how to answer. I don't think you realize what you've done for her, he continued, voice low. She's laughing again, drawing, asking questions. You brought her back to life, Clara. Clara blinked hard. She's the one doing the work. I just meet her where she is. Jack smiled faintly. You do that with everyone, don't you? She didn't answer. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with something warm and tentative. Finally, Jack stepped closer. I was scared to feel anything for a long time. But lately, I can't stop thinking about you. Not just because of Lila, because of you. Clara's breath caught. Her voice trembled. This wasn't supposed to happen. I know, Jack said. But it did. They stood in the soft firelight, shadows dancing around them. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, something new was beginning. The storm had passed, but something inside Clara hadn't quite settled. She sat on the porch of her small rental house the next morning, coffee cooling in her hands as the sunrise painted the sky in soft streaks of orange and rose. Her hair was still slightly damp from the night before. Her mind dashed restless. Jack Harper's words had stuck with her all night. I was scared to feel anything for a long time. But lately, I can't stop thinking about you. She hadn't expected a confession. She hadn't even expected warmth. For weeks, she'd told herself his visits were about Lila, that whatever flickered between them was imagined. Safer that way, but it wasn't imagined, and now she had to decide what to do with it. That Monday, the school buzzed more than usual. News of the storm rescue had made its rounds, twisted and embellished by every pair of lips in Willow Creek. Some claimed Jack carried Clara through floodwaters. He hadn't. Others said they saw her leave the school with Lila asleep in her arms. True. While some whispered she spent the night at the ranch. Also true. But in a guest room with the door firmly closed, Clara walked the hallways with her head held high. But every sideways glance chipped at her nerves. She hated being watched, judged. That afternoon, a crisp envelope arrived on her desk. Inside, a formal job offer from a prestigious school for the deaf in Austin. Triple the salary. Advanced resources. A community of sign language professionals. A dream job she'd applied for a year ago, back when she thought she needed to escape her old life entirely. She stared at it for a long time. It was everything she once wanted, but that was before Lila, before Jack. Jack, meanwhile, tried to stay away. After that night at the ranch, he'd sensed Clara pulling back again. He didn't blame her. He knew her walls were high for a reason. But he also knew the way her presence lingered long after she left. He'd walk past Lila's sketchbook on the kitchen table and think of her. Catch himself signing clumsily in the mirror, trying to get it right. He wasn't good with words. He never had been. But he was good with intention. It was Friday when Clara made her decision. She asked Lila to stay after class to help organize the art shelf. The girl agreed eagerly, always happy to spend extra time with her favorite teacher. As they worked, Clara knelt beside her and signed slowly, I might be leaving soon. A big school offered me a new job. Lila froze, her eyes wide. Are you going to go? She signed. Clara hesitated, then answered honestly, I don't know. It's a good opportunity, but it would mean leaving you. Leaving everything here. Lila bit her lip, then slowly signed. But you're ours now. Clara's breath caught. Lila continued, her signs more urgent. You make me feel brave. Daddy smiles more when you're around. We need you. Clara hugged her tightly. tears slipping silently down her cheeks. That evening, Clara drove to the Harper Ranch one last time. She found Jack out back, working on a broken gate. He looked up when he heard her car, eyes unreadable. "I got a job offer," she said, skipping greetings, his jaw tensed. "Yeah? In Austin." A beat of silence passed. "That's a big deal," he said. She nodded. "It is." He set his wrench down carefully. "And are you taking it?" "I haven't decided." He looked at her then, not with longing, but with the steady gaze of a man who wouldn't beg. "You deserve whatever future you want," he said. "I won't stand in the way." "I know," she replied. "That's what makes you different." He turned toward the horizon, where the sun was starting to set behind the hills. "I'd be lying if I said it wouldn't break Li's heart." "Mine too, probably. But you've got to go where your heart tells you." Clara swallowed hard, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't the job acceptance. It was a letter. Her decline. "I already told them no," she said softly. Jack turned sharply. "Why?" She stepped closer, heart pounding, hands trembling. And then, without a word, she raised both hands and signed. "Because my heart's already here." Jack stared at her, stunned. And then awkwardly, carefully, he lifted his hands and signed back. "I love you." His fingers fumbled. Not perfect, but clear. Clara laughed through tears. "You've been practicing." "For a while now," he said. "Was hoping I'd get the chance to say it." She stepped into his arms, and he held her like he never wanted to let go. In the distance, Lila watched from the porch, a wide grin on her face. She signed to herself, finally. The end.